As we continue on in this lesson on configuring AD in complex environments, in this subtopic, we're going to talk about configuring interoperability in Server 2016, and we're going to focus on two key areas, configuring the name suffix routing, or UPN, and also drill into those very important DNS SRV records. UPN, or user principal name suffixing, is the idea of adding another UPN suffix so users can log on using that UPN suffix instead of the default one assigned at the forest level. Remember, our domain name is azmtp.pearson.com. So remember, our default forest name is pearson.com, and then the domain that we've created is azmtp.pearson.com. So if we want to simplify that, or maybe even mask that, we could create a user principal name so when users log in, they can use something like brian@mtp.com. You manage these through the Active Directory domains and trust. We're going to see that shortly. And then we need to modify the user accounts in ADUC to make sure the users use this new suffix. But unless you get paid by the hour, changing account by account by account in Active Directory users and computers to add a new suffix is going to get tedious and or expensive. So what we'll do is use this PowerShell command to change the UPN suffix for multiple users. Let's take a moment to step out and take a look at the UPN suffix configuration. So we're back in Windows Server 2016-2. We're going to go back to our tools. And inside of our tools, we're going to go to the Active Directory Domains and Trusts. And once we get in there, we're going to right-click on the Active Directory Domains and Trust. If you hover over it, it shows you the entire FQDN, fully qualified domain name. We'll right-click on that. We'll go to Properties. And inside of here, you'll see the UPN suffixes. So let's say, as we talked about, we want to change it from azmtp.pearson.com to something simpler, mtp.com. So we'll type that in, we'll add that. Now we have another UPN suffix that users can use to log in with. We'll go ahead and do an OK. And then we're going to jump over to the user accounts. A quick way to get over to Active Directory users' computers is to right-click on the domain name and click Manage. Instead of going to the Tools and the Server Manager and going to ADUC, you can actually get into ADUC this way as well. Then we'll go to Brian Alderman as one of the user accounts. We'll right-click on that and we'll go to Properties. And then we'll go to the Account tab. And you'll see the logon name. We'll just call it Balderman. Yeah, I get called that a lot. And we'll use the drop down. Now instead of just azmtp.pearson.com, we have the new one we just added called the mtp.com. And that's a way we can assign per user the new user principal name suffix, allowing them to log on using this instead of that lengthy default forest name that we originally created. And don't forget, if you have multiple users, there's that PowerShell command that you can use to apply this change to multiple users instead of doing them individually as we've done here. The good news is that registration of SRV records is pretty much hands-off. Everything is done automatically. You might have some issues that you may have to troubleshoot, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. Your SRV record contains several different elements. The service name and the port number associated with that service, whether it be TCP or UDP or both. And if it's both, you have to have two records in there. Common SRV records include the LDAP over TCP, which is going to be using port 389, Kerberos over port 88, the Kerberos v5 authentication protocol, or KPassWD, is on port 464, and then the global catalog service is on port 3268. It also contains the host name, which is the name of the host offering the service, and your clients will use this to determine the IP address of that host name once it's retrieved. It'll also indicate whether it's TCP or UDP. Again, you can use both, but we need two separate records for both. And then the options. Your options include preferences, weight, and priority value. And all this does is prioritize when there are multiple records that are pointing to the same service or server, and you want to be able to control which server responds first. As I mentioned, SRV records are pretty self-sufficient, but you'll have to modify SRV records if they're not configured to be dynamically updated. That's one of the configuration settings for these SRV records. Strongly recommend you do that in an Active Directory environment. If you don't want to use the interface, you have good old PowerShell. You can drop down to PowerShell. When you want to add an SRV record, you're going to use the add-DNS server resource record. If you want to modify settings like the preference or the weight or the priority, you can use the set-DNS server resource record. So this is information about these records and how we manage these records. And I mentioned services, but I haven't really told you which services. The Global Catalog Service, Kerberos, Password Service, and LDAP Service. And in addition to the protocol and the host name, the options, they also contain information about sites. Remember, sites are really, really powerful because the client, when trying to access a service, it's going to look within its own site first to optimize that response. But if not, it's then going to go to the next closest site to the client. And if that baby fails, it's going to go through a random list of domain controllers in your domain. If you have troubles with SRB records, the first thing I want you to do is restart the NetLogon service. And then if that doesn't resolve it, then use the NSLOOKUP of this service name here. I have MTP in uppercase in there for a reason. You'll input your domain name instead of mtp.com to assist in the troubleshooting process. So understanding SRB records is very important, although it's pretty much hands-off. Let's step out to our image and take a peek at where we find these SRB records. And here we are back in Windows Server 2016-2. We're going to go to Tools, but we're not going to go into anything that begins with Active Directory. We're going to go to DNS. And you're going to see we have our forward lookup zones and our reverse lookup zones. We're going to be concerned with our forward lookup zones. We're going to click on our domain azmtp.pearson.com. And you'll see we have our AZMTP 1 host record and 2 host record. But we want to look at SRB records. So we're going to double click on Sites. We're going to double click on the only site that we have now called Default First Site Name. We have the TCP protocol. Remember we said we have TCP and UDP, but we're talking about site-specific SRB records. So I'm going to go ahead and double-click on that. You'll notice we have our global catalog server, Kerberos, and LDAP. Notice the port numbers I mentioned earlier, 3268, 88, and 389. Now instead of going to the sites, we can also go into the protocol specifically, TCP, global catalog, Kerberos, K-password as well, which is a Kerberos password, and LDAP again. And then the UDP, we have Kerberos and K-password. Now if I expand on domain DNS zones and forest DNS zones, we have sites and TCP. We're going to double click on TCP. Notice this is where our LDAP information, port number 389. And then we'll drill into sites, default for site name, TCP. And again, we have our LDAP configurations in there as well. So lots of SRB records created for you automatically. But there's nothing you need to worry about when it comes to managing these, but you will use a net login to restart if you start seeing any issues with SRB records. If that doesn't work, you'll use NSLOOKUP to drill in a little bit deeper. So remember, your clients need SRB records. Also remember, your clients will love you if you shorten the UPN suffix, and we know how to do that as well.